everybody, my name's Chad. I'm the Senior Keeper of Birds and Herp Fauna here at Adelaide Zoo, and I'm introducing you today to our beautiful Aldabra Giant Tortoise. Her name is Aonika, and Aonika is currently 43 years old. Now, comparative to a lot of other animals, that's a pretty impressive age, but when it comes to giant tortoises, that's nothing. She's got many more years ahead of her. In fact, the oldest member of her species that's alive today is at least 188 years old, and so being 43, she's still a spring chicken, believe me. Now, tortoises are a pretty amazing group of animals. There's many species found around the world. We've got lots of them right here at Adelaide Zoo. Aldabra Giant Tortoise, as the name suggests, are one of the two giant land tortoises found around the world, and they're the second largest. The largest is the Galapagos tortoise, which are found on the Galapagos Islands off South America. The Aldabra Giant Tortoise is found on a group of islands off the coast of Africa that are called the Seychelles. Now, in the Seychelles, there's a particular atoll called the Aldabra Atoll, and that's where the majority of this species are found living today. Now, what's interesting for these animals on islands is that reptiles tend to get bigger. With mammals, they tend to get smaller if you have them on an island for a long time. So, for example, the smallest tiger species is a Sumatran tiger. They live on an island. Whereas when it comes to reptiles, it's the biggest of the reptiles that are found on islands. So the tortoises are the biggest lizard, being a Komodo dragon, found on small islands off the coast of Indonesia. The biggest geckos found on an island on New Caledonia. And birds are very similar as well. You get very large flightless birds on islands. But with that size also comes a few other interesting features, and one of them is their temperament. Tortoises, the big land tortoises, love attention. So as you can see, Aonika here loves nothing more than a good pat, and that's because from a land tortoise perspective, they had no natural predators on these islands. So they have no reason to be scared of anything, basically. So for her, there's only two key things in life that she's really got to be worried about, and that's making sure she's got enough food, and being that she's a grazer, there's plenty of food here. And also making sure that she keeps parasites off her body, and so that's why she loves a pat, because where they live, there's a bird called a rail. It's a small little bird, and they love eating parasites. And when they start feeling little ticklings around their legs, they stretch their body out like this. That way the bird can get in there and get all those parasites, and it helps keep them nice and healthy. Now, with tortoises, they've got a few key features. The main one is obviously the shell. Now, when it comes to tortoise, turtle, terrapin, depends on who you ask, but essentially all of them have got a shell, and the shell actually forms a key part of their body. They have nerve endings in their shell, so she can actually feel it when I touch her shell here. It's not the same sort of feeling that you'd get if you touch your skin. It's more like, I don't know, you may have gone to the doctor and had a local anaesthetic at some point in your life, and you feel the pressure, but you don't actually feel the full sensation. That's kind of what it's like in their shell. But also in their shell are their rib bones. So our rib bones are inside under our skin. Their rib bones actually form a key part of the shell, and that means that it's part of their skeletal structure as well. Now, they also have all the other features of a land-based reptile, a vertebrate reptile, being 4 legs, and also eyes, nostrils, all the above. They can hear. They don't have external ears, but they can hear. And all of those features help them out on their island. But for a tortoise like this, the size that she's got to, she doesn't have to worry about predators, so she doesn't have any other features that help protect her. And even this shell, she can't get much of her body into the shell. Unlike this girl here who's just walked in perfectly on cue. Her name's Mawe. Mawe is an African spurred tortoise. She's only going to be in shot for a little bit of a second because she's always on the move. Mawe is almost full grown, and she's found on the African continent, on the mainland. And so Mawe has some big spurs on her rear legs, and also can get a lot more of her body into her shell, and that's because where she lives, she has predators that she has to worry about. So it's a bit of a different story. Now the other key features of this animal, obviously their size, coming with that is their weight. So Aonika weighs about 120 kilos, which is a pretty impressive weight. The males of her species get to be about 150, 160 kilos, so they're a very, very large animal. So with any animal, they have needs when we're looking after them in human care. And in the wild, they're met by the environment, but here in human care, we need to make sure that we're meeting those needs for them. Now, a key part of that is enrichment. And enrichment is basically anything different in the animal's environment that we might add to trigger behaviours. So a key one for Aonika is actually a bath. So Aonika loves bath time, and it's kind of odd looking at a reptile. A lot of people assume they don't have much personality, but when the yellow bath bucket comes out and the loofah, she gets very excited and she walks straight over as fast as a tortoise can go, sits there next to you and stretches her neck and legs out like this, ready for her bath time, and she loves that bath. Also, lots of other things are enrichment. So for her enclosure mate, Maui, is definitely enrichment. There's always something going on between the two of them. We also add different plants in here that she might like to try and eat, even just experience differently. But for a reptile as well, environment is a key thing that's quite enriching for them, because being a reptile, they can't create their own body heat. So in days past, you may have heard that referred to as cold-blooded. Now, cold-blooded isn't really accurate, because no point does a reptile ever really have cold blood. We like to use the term ectothermic. That's ecto as in outside and thermic meaning heat. They get all of their body heat from the world around them, so they don't produce any heat themselves. So for her, the environment in terms of its heat is really important and quite enriching. So out here in the exhibit, there's lots of different spots where she might sit, because the sun travels through the day. So that's quite enriching for her, when she can chase the sun a little bit and get a nice basking spot. But also in their bedrooms where they spend the evenings, for her, there's always different basking spots, because we might switch on different basking lights overnight. It's also just a different environment for her to be in, so that's something that's really useful for her from an enrichment perspective. Also though, humidity is really important for this species. Tortoises need humidity, and so for her, a shower down with a hose is really great, and also the sprinklers in our exhibit that get switched on at certain times of the day, they really, really like the sprinklers too, and you'll find her following the sprinkler paths and sitting in the sprinklers, so that's really important. Now when it comes time to habitat, where these animals live, there's not a huge amount of what we call mid-story growth. So that's plants that kind of sit like a big bush, like a tea tree bush or something like that. There's a lot of shrubs on the ground and then a lot of open space. And so in this exhibit here, we've got a lot of open space where she can roam, a lot of grazing opportunities, because that's how they eat. They graze along and eat plants on the ground, so we've got a lot of opportunity for that. And so that's really important for their environment. Also, like I said, opportunities to get close to water, because humidity is really important, so we provide that. And also obstacles around that they might have to move around. Doesn't seem like much, but we've got an old tree stump in the middle of the yard which has got some grass over the top of it. It's only small, but for a tortoise that's quite a thing to move around, and so we like adding that. There's also, if you can see it behind me, a little bush behind here. That's one of her favourite places to go, because for an Aldabra Giant Tortoise, if they need to get out of the heat of the day, they'll walk under a small bush. And so that's what they'll do. And so Aonika tries to get her whole body under that bush, which is really quite a comical thing to see, but it's a really important part of their habitat that we provide for them here at the zoo. Now where they live, like I was saying, is in the Seychelles Islands, which are within the tropics, and so humidity and heat is always present for a tortoise, and so we need to make sure that we give them that here in Adelaide, which doesn't reflect that habitat. So for Aonika, and for Maui as well, who's having a nice little munch on the grass next to me at the moment, for these two animals, we need to make sure that we give them that access to heat and humidity at all times. And so their bedrooms, which are at the back of the exhibit, they'll have access to those areas at all times. And so in there, it's always nice and warm. There's a consistent heat because the floor's heated. There's also overhead heating, which we can adjust depending on what the temperature outside is, and we also make sure it's nice and humid at all times. Now for tortoises, in terms of their world impacts and things that are going on in the world around them, they actually have some really key conservation stories. So we're involved in a lot of different projects at Zoos SA, but one species that we're working with at the moment is the radiated tortoises. Now radiated tortoises are about the same size as Maui, and they live on the island of Madagascar. Unfortunately, they're very heavily trafficked, and that's for two different reasons, one for food, but also for pets. And so we've actually got a group of 24 of them here at Adelaide Zoo, which came from a seizure, and there have been thousands and thousands of them found in seizures around the world, and unfortunately it's quite a common thing for tortoises. So one thing that we try and talk about is making sure that when you're overseas, that you do the responsible thing when you're travelling, and don't participate in activities that might have a tortoise that you don't know where it came from, and also just not keeping these animals as pets. I know it sounds silly, but unfortunately tortoises end up in the pet trade here in Australia sometimes illegally. In fact, Maui, the other tortoise in here, was somebody's pet before she was found on the front doorstep of a zoo in Victoria. So just remembering that these animals have really specialist care, and they're not really built for household pets, is something important to remember as well. Unfortunately as well for tortoises, is their life history has made them quite vulnerable in the past. So for the giant land tortoises, in the past these animals were hunted, and in some cases to extinction. There were different subspecies on each island, and at times they've been hunted to extinction because of early explorers actually eating these animals. Because they last a long time without food, and they go a really long time without water as well, these animals were ideal to basically put on a boat and take on long journeys at sea, and then the sailors would actually eat them. But in certain islands, the tortoises were hunted to complete extinction because of that fact. It also meant that for about 200 years, they were first discovered in the 1600s, they weren't ever officially described by science until the 1800s, because not a single one of them made it back to London or New York, where the majority of that work was getting done, because they were getting eaten along the way. Unfortunately, that's a really common story for a lot of big island wildlife. You think of the dodo and so on. So just remembering how important these animals are is also really important for their long-term survival.